Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. In 1969, feminist, activist, and author Alix Kates Shulman met an old friend at a Manhattan party. He'd become an editor at Harper's, and he told her, "If you ever write a novel, call me." She went home and wrote a few chapters and an outline, and he bought it for $7,500. The original paperback edition sold over 1 million copies, and it continues to be read, reread, and reissued. Most recently this year in celebration of its 35th anniversary. That's a remarkable story, and congratulations.
Thank you.
It's called The Memoirs of an Ex-Prom Queen. And in the foreword, you say that you're not sure whether the fact that it survived its relevance for 35 years means it's a personal triumph or a political tragedy or is sad. What do you think?
You know, every single thing can be looked at from the point of view of how it's improved or how it's been how it's the same or how it's gotten worse.
Right.
Yes, and so it depends on what day you ask me. The fact is that certainly the feminist movement made a huge difference in women's lives. We don't have the same world we had when I was growing up. It's so much better in so many ways. Women are independent. They can at least get credit. They can do all kinds of jobs that they never could before. And a lot of the really terrible things that happen to women have names, at least. And there are laws against them, like sexual harassment or rape, marital rape, date rape, which when I was growing up didn't have names.
It didn't even have a name, right?
Right. But on the other hand, you can look at it from the other side. Those things still exist. Women still have a big disparity with men as far as their income goes. So it depends on what your temperament is, I think, whether you're going to see it as a vast improvement or the opposite. But I do think that one of the places where women have not made such huge strides, and this is really the subject of Memoirs of an Ex-Prom Queen, is the relation between the sexes. That part of it, I'm not sure, has gotten a whole lot better. I mean, the fact is, women still are sexually harassed all the time, and rape continues all the time, and women still are very much concerned about their looks, in some ways more so than when I wrote this novel 35 years ago. I mean, at that time, we didn't have cosmetic surgery in junior high school. We didn't have, at least we didn't know about bulimia and anorexia as rampant, and we didn't have supermodels who were so thin that they were dying right and left.
And sex wasn't so obviously talked about and displayed.
Right.
I mean, women are so definitely sexual objects, no matter how hard you try not to be. Isn't that true?
It's true. Women are sexual objects. They were then, they are now. One of the very first demonstrations of the fledgling women's liberation movement back in, I think, 1968. In fact, I think it was the first national demonstration, was the protest against the Miss America pageant.
In Atlantic City,
and
on
that
the boardwalk.
Yeah, on the boardwalk.
And you were there.
I was there. It was an amazing event. It was the first time that most people in the country ever even heard the term women's liberation. A bunch of the protesters got inside of the hall where the pageant was
That was an interesting story also, because you bought the tickets.
That's right.
Tell us why you bought the tickets.
Well, I was married at the time, and I had a joint bank account with my husband, but since he was the earner, I would never have dreamed of writing a check that he didn't approve of. It's hard for people to even know that such things went on only 35 years ago. And so when some of the protesters decided that we had to get inside, I said that I would write that check and buy those tickets, and it was $70, which in 1968 was a lot of money. And I thought, I don't care. And I felt it as a great rebellious act to defy my husband and buy a block of tickets for the women's liberation movement. But anyway, the women who got in there sat in the balcony, and at a certain moment, they unfurled a banner that just said in huge letters, women's liberation. Over the side of the balcony, they had front row seats, and all the television cameras turned on them and broadcast those two words to the whole country. It was a wonderful moment.
Exciting. That's the demonstration that's always been reported that you burned bras, which in fact you didn't do, did you?
No, we didn't. But I have to confess, we might have if we had been able to get a permit to have a bonfire on the boardwalk. But in fact, they didn't let us have a permit, and rightly so. You know, the boardwalk is very flammable. So instead, we threw all these things into what was called a freedom trash can. Instead of burning them, we just tossed in the bras and the high heels and the Playboy magazines.
That's wonderful. You know, you've always been able to write that has a connection with you. You write about you and your experiences and your thought. I mean, I guess everybody does do that, but yours is a particularly personal style of writing, isn't it?
I know that certainly the source of my writing is in myself, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. My last 3 books have been nonfiction, memoirs, but my first books, and I think my chief love and my next book that I write are all fiction. But this Memoirs of an Ex-Prom Queen was my first adult novel, and I didn't know how much fictionalizing or making up I could get away with. So I did base a lot of the events in the novel on my own life. But I was not trying to write about myself. I was trying to write about a certain kind of life, maybe a collective life that many, many middle class, especially Midwestern girls of our generation were living, but that hadn't been described before in fiction. It was a life seen from a feminist point of view. Of course, I never put in any overtly feminist ideas or used the word or anything like that.
But it was hailed as the first novel to come out of the women's movement, of this women's movement. And it really is.
Yes, because I look at all of the activities of just normal life, like, well, of course, sex, that's a big part of it, and how women feel about themselves, especially young girls, but also jobs, all kinds of discrimination, and it's a comedy. I mean, it's a comic novel. Although I have to tell you, Ronnie, that when it was first published, it was, as I say, a very unusual point of view for readers, and there was a big fight between readers who found it funny, who had some feminist consciousness, and those who found it tragic. And so, you know, they used to argue, no, it's not funny at all. This is my life.
It's very sad. I thought there were a couple of things, and I wanted to talk about how it did get picked up as the paperback, which I thought was really an interesting thing, and it talks about that sisterhood and that sharing of feelings and experiences of women. Was that he bought the book and they did it, and then it was circulated around for paperback sale, right?
Well, they always automatically sent galleys to every paperback house so that there would be a paperback sale for every novel, no matter what. But when the galleys
and it's a first novel.
And a first novel, right. When the galleys reached those paperback houses, they were snatched up by all the secretaries, as they were called then. Now they're called editorial assistants. And they were passed from hand to hand, and there was a big buzz developing about this. This was at all those houses. And back in those days, there wasn't a single publishing house that was run by a woman. That just didn't exist. And so the men didn't understand what was going on. And when they finally had an auction, and it was actually the highest price paid for a first novel up to that time, of course, compared to these days, it's a pittance, but it was enough to enable me to put my kids through college and continue to work. Yes, it was, I mean, to write, you know, was wonderful. But anyway, the man who won the auction called me in and he said, please tell me, what is it? Why is this so popular among our secretaries? Of course, I couldn't tell him in a word the whole idea of women's oppression up till then.
Right. It's just a fascinating thing. So it's been republished, and it's part of a series which is really labeled here, a classic work of feminist thought. So it's a real classic. It's very
That
It's really
thrills
marvelous,
me. I
yes.
must say, that is the part
Yeah.
of this particular republication that thrills me the most. That is now officially a classic.
It's great.
That gives me a
So
lot of
how
satisfaction.
did you discover this feminist sensibility? I mean, when did it happen? Did it come from just a mother and
I
growing
was
up? Or?
I was a mother. I had
Were you a
career
mother?
aspirations. I was older than most of the people in the women's liberation movement by maybe a decade. I was.
Were you really?
Yes, I was married and I had children, and I wasn't older than most of the women in now, but in the
Red
women's
stocking.
liberations
Yeah.
movement, Red
Yeah.
Stockings, all of which I belong to.
Yeah. How did you even find them?
I heard on the radio some interview, it was either on WBAI, probably on WBAI, of some young women who were trying to organize more people, and they announced when there was going to be a meeting, and so I called up my girlfriend, who was also a mother, my playground mate, and we went to that first meeting, and the minute I got into that room and heard those ideas, it just took me. That was it. And I never stopped going to meetings after that.
They had wonderful names too. It was the Red
Yes.
Stockings. Who else? What other
Well,
groups?
back then, at the very beginning,
Right.
those groups hadn't been named yet. They didn't
I see.
exist.
They
This
came
was
later.
even earlier. This was when the meetings were there were larger meetings of about 60 or 70 people called New York Radical Women, and they would meet and discuss, but the group was getting too big and unwieldy for everybody to have a voice, so they decided to split into
I see.
smaller
Oh,
groups.
that's interesting.
And Red Stockings was one of them. But it took a while before those groups were even named. And I'll tell you a funny story.
Give me a year that you think
This
it
is
was.
1967 or 8.
Okay.
Around, those 2 years. And actually, the planning of the Miss America demonstration was done by people from that larger group. And after that summer, there was a little burnout, and that group didn't meet again for a while. And that's when the small groups really got off the ground. So it was the summer of '68, I think.
It's interesting when you compare it. It sounds very much like ACT UP when it first started.
Yes. I think this is the way the left often
yeah.
organizes.
And now with Cindy Sheehan having left and going off, I mean, you can totally understand that, right? Her
Absolutely.
exhaustion and problems.
Of course. Oh, that burnout happens all the time. You can't keep that level of activity and passion up in the public all the time.
Right.
When I was in Red Stockings, we used to meet every week, and sometimes 2 or 3 times. But then we also had monthly organizing meetings to organize new groups of Red Stockings, and we would have the members from the original group stay with the new group for a month or 2, just in order to get consciousness raising going. And so sometimes you might wind up being at a meeting almost every single night. And so of course,
and what
people
happened with the
did-
children?
Yeah, right. Well, what happened with my children
What happened with the
was-
husband?
Yes, my husband did step up and do some babysitting. He had to, because about the same time I wrote an essay called A Marriage Agreement,
Oh yes, I wanted to talk about that.
which presumed that men and women's work and time are equally valuable, and that no matter who makes more money, both parents should take equal care of their children and of their household. And this was an outrageous proposal at the time.
And
I can't tell
he
you.
agreed with you. The two.
He had to agree. I mean,
Because
it
they were
was that or we were going to get divorced.
Right.
I was not going to go on under the old system. And I must say, and he was a good sport about it, although he did grumble somewhat, and I think he took a lot of flack from his friends, but he did step up.
Was that after Memoirs?
No, it was before.
interesting.
I was writing the memoirs about the same time. That was published in 1969, and Memoirs came out in 1972. So I'd probably just started writing it, or maybe the next. No, in fact, it was because of the marriage agreement that I was able to write at all, because then I demanded my time.
And that's so interesting. So you didn't start. Were you a did you think you were going to be a mathematician?
what happened was I was in love with math, and my first book was a children's book about mathematics.
Is there a relationship with numbers and words? And the cadence?
Well, now I've been studying about the brain. They seem to be in different parts of the brain. I don't know.
All right.
There's certainly a relationship between music and numbers.
Right. Yeah.
But I didn't study mathematics in college, and it was after I left college, and I studied philosophy as a graduate student, and that has a lot of math overtones. It was after that that I decided to go back to college and take a degree in math. So it was something I always wanted to study, but I didn't until later.
And then you started writing children's books.
And I started writing children's books, and as I say, my first one was a math book. It came to me, I was inspired. The only time I was ever inspired, the whole plot of this novel, chapter book, came to me, and it was a mathematical plot, and I wrote it very quickly.
I mean, it just came to you one...
Yes.
Like that, and the rest of the books came from experience or thinking or something?
Yes.
So
and
Emma Goldman, did you pick her out?
Oh, and Emma Goldman was my first long book, really. Yeah. It was a biography of Emma Goldman because a friend of mine had just written a biography of Bessie Smith for a certain series, and he told me that if I came up with a good idea, he would try to help me get a contract for that book. So I looked around, and Emma Goldman's works were all out of print. Nobody knew who she was at that time. Anyway, not many people, not young people. And so I did get a contract for that book, and I wrote it, and it was my education, actually. It taught me how to write a life. And after I had written Emma's life, and I felt a great identification with her, then I felt I could write anybody's life. So the next book I wrote was Memoirs of an Ex-Prom Queen.
And that came out of all this different experience.
Oh, absolutely. It was
a tyranny of what is it? A tyranny of conformity, or what? I don't know. What is it?
I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio.
Don't you still worry about
conformity? Oh, definitely. And in fact, I get letters from high school girls about Memoirs of an Ex-Prom Queen, and that's the thing that they find in this novel, that there are alternative ways. I mean, not that I show alternatives in the novel, I don't. The novel shows the conformity and the double binds of how are you going to live with your own ideas and yet not be kicked out of society. And they say, oh, it's still happening, that's the way it is for me. But it does make people start to think about the contradictions, you know. Yes, conformity, I think, look, humans are social animals, or as Aristotle put it, man is a social animal. We'll amend that a little bit. Right. And conformity is one of the social processes by which people are able to live in groups. So it takes a lot of deliberate thought and a lot of, I think, heroic action on the part of some individuals who are willing to take the risks involved in defying the rules of conformity. And then they change it for everybody.
Yeah. And that's the strength of a movement, as opposed, we talked about the women's movement and feminism. Feminism is a more, what is it?
Well,
it's a state of being or something?
I think of feminism as an idea. The idea of equality. A very simple, straightforward idea. But you can't put that into action unless you have a movement. And I don't think that individuals here and there, no matter how brave they might be, can possibly change the rules of society or change the way people think about such basic things as male-female relations, gender, without having a movement, without having a mass movement. With, you know, the ideas can get promulgated by a few, and that's great, and it's necessary, but it isn't enough. In order to change things, there has to be a political movement.
So you have to have the people to articulate and to help, and it's hard business. It's a hard work. I mean, you have to work hard to organize, as you said. You get.
Oh, it's very hard.
What movements do we see now?
This doesn't seem to me to be a time of movements. This is a time, well, I'm sure there are. Well, there is an anti-war movement building. There's certainly...
It's taken an awful long time.
Right.
It has
It's
not had
amazing.
the same... I mean, those of us who lived through Vietnam and other
Right.
times, it's just not the same, and I don't know why.
But you know, somebody pointed out in something I read, and I can't remember who, I'm sorry to say, that by this time in the Vietnam War, there wasn't a great deal more organized
right?
movement than there is now. That it took a long time, and that in fact, the anti-war movement for this Iraq war started earlier and was a little bigger than at a comparable time in Vietnam. So I take a lot of heart from that.
And it's also interesting to see, I mean, just in the political spectrum, if you watch these candidates, they've all moved up.
Absolutely.
And they keep ratcheting up. So.
Yes, and that's what happened before, too.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
Johnson had to quit because of it. So you're going to have, well, who knows what we're going to have, but I hope
And
that...
the women who are under attack and abortion.
Yes.
And look at this recent Supreme Court thing on equal pay. Was that?
I can't bear what's happening to this court. I mean,
Yes,
all of
it's
our worst nightmares are coming true. That
More than we thought.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
It's a majority of 5, and we used to have on our side a majority of 5, and now who knows what's going to happen. But I don't think there's really an abortion movement the way there was when we had to change everything from it being a taboo, not even spoken about.
And totally illegal and everything
Yes,
else.
and completely illegal. So I think it's going to take...
something.
I don't know what it's going to take. I think that it's going to take a lot of grief for a lot of people before it's clear that something has to change. Of course, now we do have plenty of representatives in the Congress who are in favor of abortion rights, even if they have a hard time talking about it. And they use a lot of euphemisms, but it's much better than it was
Earlier.
Yeah.
Definitely. The movement for for marriage.
Yes.
Now, that's such an interesting thing, because when they have this movement for marriage, they don't talk about equality in a marriage, do they?
No, I don't. I haven't.
Do you think that there's a difference? Isn't this an interesting question?
I
I don't
think
know how
there
we're going to
is.
get into this now.
I think that marriage between people of the same gender are bound to be far more
Egalitarian.
it's going to be much more equal, because there isn't a presumption of roles.
Right.
The hard thing, when I wrote my marriage agreement, the very hard thing for us to change was to overcome centuries, millennia of sex roles, gender roles, presumptions about who gets to do what. But when there are 2 people of the same gender, you just don't have those presumptions.
That's so interesting. It's true. Yeah.
So I think it's going to be a much more equal, and maybe it'll be a model for continuing to make heterosexual marriage more equal. That would be great.
It should be a contract.
Yeah.
I mean, it should be domestic partnerships, and then if you want to go to a church, you go to a church.
Right.
But
Right.
the whole thing is, if only we could really lay out the agenda and say, all right, everybody's going to agree to this and believe it, and we'll lead the world into, right?
Well, you know, I didn't put any same-sex relationships into Memoirs of an Ex-Prom Queen, though I did in my next novel, Burning
Yes,
Question.
I wanted to talk about that.
But I do have an abortion scene in Memoirs, which was somewhat shocking at the time. There were other novels that had abortions in them, but what I was trying to show was how risky and horrible it was for a woman to just exercise this obvious right. It was the same with the sex in this book. In this novel, almost all the sex is bad. No, there's one relationship that is really good, with, where the sex is good. But much of it is about the adolescent groping that goes on, and sexual, and the pawing, and all of those things. And also, at that time, people didn't even acknowledge the clitoris. They didn't acknowledge that women could have orgasms. That was a new thing. So I had bad sex in this novel, but in subsequent novels, I did try to put in good sex, you know. The same with...
We're going to run out of time before we have time, but you've written about homeless people?
Yes.
And
that was in my novel, On the Stroll.
Right.
Yes. I think it may have been the first novel about a bag lady, and she was my that was a big challenge to me because it wasn't exactly from my own experience, although I have to confess I am a scavenger, and it gave me great pleasure to write about her shopping bags and what was in each of them and how she got her stuff. But it was actually, that book was about a shopping bag lady, a teenage runaway prostitute, and a pimp. And I haven't exactly lived any of those lives, but I have to tell you that there is that in me that is in all of those characters.
Yeah. And now you're writing, we're almost at the end of this program. So you're finishing another...
a memoir now.
Another memoir. Your memoirs are chronological, right?
Not
they're
really.
not,
no,
actually.
they're not. My first memoir was about living alone on an island off the coast of Maine without any electricity or plumbing.
I somehow made this your memoir.
Oh no, it's not. It's
I
a
understand.
novel. Even though it has the word memoir in the title. And then my next memoir was about my parents' deaths. My life as a daughter, really. It was called A Good Enough Daughter, and seeing my parents out of this world. And my new memoir, which I've just completed and turned into my editor, so it won't be out for a year, is about my husband, my love affair with my husband. We were lovers in high school, and then we didn't see each other for 30-some years, and then we got back together again. And he had a terrible fall and sustained a bad brain injury, and so it's about that fall and living with the aftermath of it.
Well, I hate to end up on that, but I'm looking forward to seeing it.
It's not really a downer of a book.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I don't think I can't imagine any of your things would be a downer.
No, I don't do downers.
Thank you, Alix Kates Shulman, and I hope that more of your books become classics and that we're around many years later to talk about them.
Thank you, Ronnie. It was great fun. Thanks.
Thank you. If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.